worship service of Grace United Church in Wellsville, New York. I have an interesting fact for you today, and I am not going to make it up. It's the utter truth. Did you know that cows give more milk when their handlers call them by name and when they treat them nicely? If you call a cow by name, she'll give you more milk, they say. If you show a little more kindness and a personal touch, she'll be a little bit more productive. I wonder if perhaps the same might be true for human beings. There's a study out of England reported in the USA Today that it reveals that affectionate treatment of cattle, including giving names to them, can increase the amount of milk that they give to their owners. The average cow produces about 2,000 gallons of milk a year. But if you know her by name, she'll give you an extra 68 gallons. Now there's a message here for the church today. So let's milk this study for all it's worth. Trust me, this is some moose you can use. Researcher Catherine Douglas of Newcastle University says farmers have always believed that naming cows has a positive effect upon them. But until now, there's never been any scientific evidence. Her study shows that if a cow isn't given any individual attention, then it's likely to be more uncomfortable around human beings and it can become very stressed. A stressed cow releases a hormone called cortisol, and that hormone inhibits milk production. But we know that cow-friendly farmers name their cows and they make contact with them from a very early age. They chat with them while they're passing them by. She observes, they walk among their cows and they speak with them. And this type of farmer sometimes reminds me of the words of the old hymn, In the Garden. They go like this, and he walks with me and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own. John Bienson, the owner and operator of an organic farm in Oregon, knows each of his 165 cows by a personal name. His favorites are Cinder, Ajax, and Hawk. His grandfather started this practice, making the rule that you couldn't be a head milker until you could identify every single cow by name. You see, a cow that's happy and calm is going to produce more milk, says Benson. He's convinced that naming a cow, combined with really understanding the animals and their behavior, is going to increase their milk production. So cows that are known by name will be happy and calm and productive. On the other hand, anonymous cattle are going to be stressed and unproductive. This makes sense, doesn't it? And God knows that the same thing applies to us. It's true in Scripture. Perhaps the most frequent metaphor for God's children is sheep. And the metaphor of how God is like a good shepherd brings us much comfort. But for today, we're going to try a fun new twist, a new metaphor, and talk about a different animal, cows. Today, as we look at the book of Hebrews, we'll consider how God came to walk alongside us, to know us, and to encourage us along the way. And in turn, how when we relate to God, our lives are changed. And we become better at changing the world for good. We can become more productive. Today is World Communion Sunday. It's a good day to think about what impact we're having on the world. This past week, I participated in a virtual World Communion Day sponsored by our denominations. Prayers were said in a number of different languages. Some people were in their homes, others were in their churches all around the world. And still there were other groups who sang outdoors, and because it was virtual, when the songs were sung, we could celebrate the visuals. We could see the movements and occasionally watch them dance. God's Spirit is moving around the world through these people's lives. And it all started with Jesus. Jesus came to earth and touched individuals' lives. And now that impact continues to be multiplied all around the world. Jesus, you see, was unique in who he was and how he cared for other people. He brought us to a new understanding of who God is and how we can understand God. We understand God now to be a personal God. As we look back at the book of Hebrews, we learn how Jesus was unique, greater than the ones that came before. greater than the angels, greater than Moses, greater than the high priests of old. The writer of Hebrews explains that in seeing Jesus, we see God. And this God is not afraid to interact with us, to know us by name, even despite our foibles. To give you a little context about the book of Hebrews was written to an early Christian community made up of Jews. It may have been written by Paul or one of his co-workers, like maybe Barnabas or Apollos. We really just don't know. But we do know that the writer assumes that the group of believers that he is writing to have a thorough knowledge of the first 5 books of the Bible. They really understand the words of the Torah. They know about Abraham's family and how this family became the nation of Israel. They remember how Moses had led them out of slavery in Egypt to Mount Sinai, where they received the 10 Commandments. And there they made a covenant with God, where they built a tabernacle. And it was there that they offered sacrifices to God. They also knew about how the Hebrews wandered through the wilderness on their way to the Promised Land. They spent 40 years in the desert. They were Jewish Christians. Because these Jewish Christians are facing persecution, the writer explains to them who exactly Jesus is, so that there'll be no doubt in their mind that Jesus was who he said he was, and that as they follow him, they're following God. The letter to the Hebrews begins with the words, "Long ago, God spoke to our ancestors in many and various ways by the prophets. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by a Son. God sent Jesus to walk among us and speak to us, to show us God's will and God's way by being in relationship with us. Jesus is the reflection of God's glory and the exact imprint of God's very being, and he sustains all things by his powerful word. God chose to live among us, to know us." That sounds a lot like the first chapter of the Gospel of John. "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the Word became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory as of the Father's only Son, full of grace and truth." This infinite God who existed before the beginning of time did something new. God came to earth to live with us. God was no longer distant or silent, but came to relate personally to us through Jesus. He lived with us. I'd like you to think of a time when you lived with someone. You learn all kinds of things about them that you might not have otherwise known. I've recently experienced this. You see, in the process of moving up here to New York over the past weeks, my in-laws lived with us. They were moving into their home, but it wasn't quite ready, so they stayed with us for several weeks. Now, I learned some things about them, and I imagine that they learned some things about me. Now, I've been married to their son, Mark, for about 29 years, so I do know them pretty well. But by living under the same roof, I learned some new things, like their absolute favorite breakfast cereals and their favorite television shows, and like the joy of ice cream after every single dinner. I'm not sure if they knew that I like to sing around the house quite as much as I actually do, but I suppose that they're aware of that by now. And I'm sure that they learned some other things as well, like about my recent Twizzler obsession. There are so many delicious new flavors. If you lived with someone else, you learn some things about them. Some things that might be out of your box, and there are ups and downs, even if that someone is a loved one. Now imagine this. Imagine an infinite God choosing to live with mortals. Now that's surely a quantum leap. Jesus came to live among us, to know us. But still his message was not harsh, but full of grace. He identified with humanity. He laughed and cried with friends and identified with others, even as brothers and sisters do. In fact, Hebrews goes on to say that the one who sanctifies, Jesus, and those who are sanctified, each of us, we all have one Father. For this reason, Jesus isn't ashamed to call us brothers and sisters, saying, "I will proclaim your name to my brothers and sisters in the midst of the congregation. I will praise you." I know that we've all heard a number of sermons about shepherds and how we Christians are so often people who behave like sheep. But consider this new metaphor, a cow, a farmer with cows. Imagine, like a good farmer, Jesus understands each of our distinctive identities, from those who want to be first in line to those who insist on being last. Some of us who are anxious, while others are always calm. Within any given group, just like with any herd, there's a hierarchy. And God understands and works with all of these different kinds of characteristics. We often don't take time to point out this picture of Jesus. More often we think of Jesus as our wonderful counselor, our mighty God, everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. We never think of a dairy farmer. But there's something to be said for the image of Jesus as a farmer in a pasture right along with us. It's close to the biblical image of the shepherd, the one who calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. He goes ahead of them, says Jesus, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. This is the Christ who for a little while was made lower than the angels, says the letter to the Hebrews, and who walked among us to help us. This is all for our benefit, says Hebrews. For it is clear that he did not come to help the angels, but the descendants of Abraham. Jesus comes to earth to help us, like a farmer who cares for us and knows the uniqueness of each individual. Think about this. We, in turn, when we're impacted by this love of Jesus, by this love of God, when we are impacted by this, we tend to be more productive. And this pleases God. My Father is glorified by this, says Jesus, using a slightly different agricultural metaphor, that you bear much fruit and become my disciples. The question is, are we being productive? Now, it would be kind of weird to push this image too far and begin thinking of ourselves as actual milking cows. Our output isn't supposed to be dairy products or even fruit. Instead, says Hebrews in Hebrews 12, it is to include mutual love and hospitality to strangers, concern for prisoners, faithfulness, and a life of contentment. Isn't it interesting that when you think of people who have these characteristics, they do seem to be more productive. They're easy to be around. It's really easy to be around people and to work with people who are content, people who are loving, people who show hospitality and kindness, and those who are faithful. In turn, those people tend to be very productive. They touch many people in positive ways. The ripple effect of their good deeds reaches far and wide. As we grow closer to God, these characteristics become a natural part of our lives. Sociologist Tony Campolo says that when the saints of the church become deeply spiritual, they feel a driving need to respond to the needs of others. You see, growing closer to Jesus actually makes us more sensitive to the needs of others, and in fact, more productive as Christians as we live out our faith walk. Speaking of sensitivity, I have one more cow story to share with you. It's the story of Temple Grandin. She's a prolific writer and a researcher. You may have seen the movie about her. As a child, she was particularly sensitive to animals. She innately knew what they liked and what would upset them. She approached the world through the lens of autism. Because of this, she had a unique understanding of animals. She was really sensitive to the things that would bother them or upset the cows on her family farm. She would notice noises or situations that would upset them. And when she went to college and then to graduate school, she didn't give up on telling others what she knew about animals. She said things like this: if we're interested in animals, then we need to study animals for their own sake and on their own terms, to the extent that that's possible. What are they doing? What are they feeling? What are they thinking? What are they saying? She spent time with the animals, observing their surroundings, understanding their perspectives, and how they might be thinking or feeling. Then she offered her insights to others. If you've read the book or watched the movie, you know that she was not very well received many times, but she persisted. She went on to college and graduate school, receiving her PhD, and during the course of her life, she wrote over 60 articles on animal behavior. She spent time to listen and to keep sharing her message of kindness. Her insights actually radically changed the way that cattle are treated. Another interesting thing about her is that as people began to listen to her and to respect her, she became an amazing spokesperson for autism and spectrum disorders. Grannon is one of the first people on the autism spectrum to document the insights that she gained from her own experiences with autism. She offers encouragement, helping others to understand and celebrate the giftedness of people with autism, and of recognizing their uniqueness and what they bring to the community. Now, this story brings us back to our initial story. If you call a cow by name, she'll give you more milk. When she's shown a little kindness and a personal touch, then she'll be more productive. Perhaps the same is true for us. Jesus came to live with us, to know us, to show us a new way of relating to God. This has the power to change our lives. When we understand how radically God loves us, wanting good things for us, it changes the way that we see the world. We have the ability to feel peace, even during the storms and troubles of our lives. From this place of acceptance and peace, we can then show care and kindness toward other people. As we express God's love toward others, we're able to impact the world in wonderful ways. This, I believe, is how Christianity has spread around the world, through the generosity and kindness of believers reflecting Jesus' love in their lives. Let's continue to share the good news through our words and actions. God bless you.
Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day